Hello and welcome to the Space Between Ideas. I'm Blank Gates. What I'd really like to know is if I can share this video, or no, if I can share the screen. All right, now what does it look like when I share the screen? So my question is, when I'm sharing the screen, can you actually see me? That would be interesting. Oh, okay, here we go. So I can see myself now. I'm in the bottom left-hand corner. Pageless is now your default. Okay, I like it, it's fine. Now what happens if I change the size? Okay, so it doesn't actually change the size. Well, there you go. Good. Can I move my little guy, my avatar? All right, so welcome to the Space Between Ideas again. Sorry for that short little thing. Let's get started. So maybe we should start with the backstory. You know, if you've been following Space Between Ideas, then you know that I've actually been doing this channel for a while. And I started this channel back because why? So what do you need to know about Space Between Ideas? My name's Blaine, and I am from Canada. Where do we start? So I moved to China when I was 23, and that might sound a little bit strange to you. Perhaps the story starts with meeting some people that I respected and looked up to. Now, instead of starting with the people that lived immediately around me when I was growing up as a child, I think the first time I really started to recognize other people and other opportunities was when I was living in upstate New York. And there's a little town called Greenville. It's right across from another town called Hudson. And between Greenville and Hudson is the Hudson River. And I was living in a chalet. I have no idea what the meaning of the word chalet is, but they told me it was a chalet. So it was some kind of house. And down the street, there was an old man, and he had a lot of life experience. One day, I walked into his house and sat down on his couch, which I had done many times before. And he loved to lecture. He would tell us all kinds of stories. He loved to tell us stories. He was a very educated person. He had read many, many, many books, and he could speak 7 languages. He learned to speak German, French, and English just from his family home. Then he had to learn Latin before entering college. And somehow throughout the rest of his life, those other 3 languages were. And one day, you know, you have to remember I was 19 years old, maybe 20. And I didn't know what was going to happen in my life. Now I'm nearly 45. So it's been over 20 years. And at that point, I had this little desire. Well, I had a strong desire to learn a second language. And I asked him what would be the most important languages in the world in the future. So now, if you're from a Spanish-speaking country, I'm sorry to tell you that I think I said something or mentioned something and we kind of ruled out Spanish. I know it's an important language, and everybody loses their mind when I explain that Spanish was not one of the languages that we put on the list. So the list consisted of I still have the list. This is the actual piece of paper from 23 years ago. He said that I needed to study humanities, history, philosophy, and language. And then under history, he said the history you need to study literature, music, art, and government. Under philosophy, you need to study logic, semantics, mathematics, and hard science. And under language, you need to study Russian, Chinese, Arabic, and French. He said you need a well-rounded humanities background with a specialization in business. Systematically take courses outside of your field. Get the reading list. Primary, secondary, tertiary. Get a yellow legal pad. Make notes. Think of possible topics for research papers. You can do it. Discipline. So you can imagine I was like 20 years old, sitting on this guy's couch, and he would bring out a chair, and his chair was a little taller than the couch. So, I mean, he wasn't a tall man, but he would sit on this chair and look down. Mr. Richardson. He had short white hair, and he told us that he had traveled, he had taught, he was a teacher, and he had taught the management of different oil companies. He would teach their children around the world. And he also served in the American military. And he could speak 7 languages. So I don't know exactly what that means for a person in their life, but it sounded interesting to us. So I moved back to Canada, and eventually I had to work with this list: Chinese, Russian, Arabic, French. And the first thing I did was move to China. I lived in China for 10 years. And I was so full of passion. I was so full of desire. I used to tell this story about Socrates. Remember Socrates? And I don't know what the real story is, but I told the story so many times that I just made it mine. So Socrates is, maybe I don't really need to share the screen. So, wow, what a background. So, I can't look at myself when I'm telling this story. All right, we'll do it like this. All right, so Socrates and the king. So Socrates is sitting in his office, and suddenly there's a knock at the door. And the king is there and says to Socrates, Socrates, I want to know everything that you know. And Socrates said, say what? And the king says, yeah, I want to know everything you know. And so Socrates says, all right, come with me. And Socrates and the king, they leave the library, they walk down the hall, they go down the stairs, they leave the palace, they walk down the road, they see a river, and as they're standing next to the river, Socrates says, all right, I want you to stand in the water. And Socrates says, okay, or the king says, okay. So the king slowly and carefully gets into the river, and Socrates goes in after him. And Socrates, he points up and says, hey, what's that? And the king looks up. And as the king is looking up, then Socrates grabs the king and throws him under the water. He's holding the king under the water. And of course the king, where are you going, Socrates? So Socrates is just, and the king he's losing his breath, and Socrates is just with all his strength holding the king under the water, all of his strength. And the king, with all of his strength, finally he just uses all of his muscle and all of his might and pushes Socrates and jumps out of the water and breathes. It says, Socrates, what are you doing? What are you doing? And Socrates says, when you want to learn, just as you want to breathe, then you can know what I know. So I started telling this story all around China. I had, uh, you know, I started in China. I was teaching English. It was 2003, and you didn't need to have a degree, and and you could just go to China. Now, of course, they had rules that said you had to have a degree, and then they didn't tell me about these rules. I didn't find out about the rules until after I'd looked at my CV because they had me sign some papers. And they said, well, you have to sign these papers, otherwise you can't work in China. So, you know how it is when you click the terms. And then one day you get curious and you go back and you look at the terms, and then you're like, oh, I'm not sure I agreed to those terms. So, anyway, so I noticed that the CV that they had included in my application wasn't exactly the same as the CV that I had sent to them to get the job. Anyways, it satisfied the government, it satisfied the school, and I was working. And I told this story to many, many students in China when I was teaching English. And that was it. That was my start. I got to live in China. I got to study Chinese. I took step by step studying Chinese, and I was so full of desire. I wanted to learn Chinese more than I wanted to breathe. And I was that student. That was the story that had captivated me. Anyways, after a year, I moved to Shanghai, and next thing you know, I was in a program at Fudan University, and I was studying Chinese. And then after another six months or so, then I found myself in doing an undergraduate degree in Chinese law. Next thing you know, I'd graduated. I'd worked for a couple of law firms, but there was a problem because I couldn't get a lawyer license in China. They don't allow foreigners to have a lawyer license. And so the firm, they said, hey, well, you can't have your own clients right now. You have to go back to Canada and get another law degree if you want a career in this field, which obviously is like quite an ordeal. Eventually, that's what I tried to do. But before trying to do that, I found a job with another law firm, and they wanted me in business development. But I didn't really understand business development. I didn't understand business. I didn't understand projects. I didn't understand managing people or things, and I didn't understand any of this. And so it was a very long time of struggling to understand what to do. And eventually I even left China because I just couldn't figure out how to do it. And I recognized that I needed to try to figure out how to start a company, and I recognized the difficulty sometimes that some people have with working with others, and I was having a difficulty working with others. It seemed as though if you want to work with others, then you have to do what they tell you to do. And I don't know, I was having a hard time with do what people tell you to do, because they were telling me to do things which I didn't want to do, or I was uncomfortable doing, or I couldn't understand, or I wasn't getting enough feedback, or I wasn't getting enough instruction, or I wasn't getting enough support, and I didn't really get it. I was always confused when I was working in these different environments. And eventually I found myself in Silicon Valley, of all places. I know it sounds weird, but I figured, I went to China because I figured that was the best place to learn Chinese. And then I was like, well, what if I do a startup company? So then I moved to Silicon Valley because I thought that was the best place to learn how to do a startup company. And maybe it was. I started going to these startup events. And eventually I went to this one startup event at a law firm in Silicon Valley. And I'd already been to a number of these events. And I saw Tom Buchholz. He was standing next to this wall. I walked over and I said, He said, you never meet people in these events, which is an odd thing to say to somebody that you're meeting for the first time. Like, what do you mean? It's you never meet anybody at these events. You're meeting me right now. But it's like one of those statements. It's like present company excluded. It's almost like I felt like I'd met a kindred spirit, and I was sharing with him the truth. And it was interesting because he had a Chinese wife. I had a Chinese wife. I was sharing this problem I had in China where I didn't really understand how to manage people and projects. I didn't understand business development. I didn't understand. I mean, I studied law in Chinese. Like, it has nothing to do with business. And when I started doing business, I had no idea what to do, how to do it, what's the process, like, I didn't understand anything. And I was just given all of this pressure to perform, but I didn't get it. It's just like, I've always had a problem with math. And when I was going to Mount Royal College, before it was called Mount Royal University, so I'm from Calgary. I was born in southern Alberta, but I went to elementary school and college in Calgary. So I'm at Mount Royal College, and one day I was trying to sign up for some math class, and there were some prerequisites or there was some issue there. And so I had to meet with a guidance counselor or an academic advisor or whatever they're called these days. And I had to explain my situation and why I wanted to be in this class so bad and why I felt like I could do it. And it was just ridiculous because, I just said, I can do it, I can do it, I can do it. But like, and the lady, she said, I had a daughter and she was on a bicycle and she was at the top of a hill and she didn't know how to ride a bike, and she said she could do it. And then next thing you know, she was just riding and she did it. And then she signed the paper, and I was in a math class, which I quit after a couple of weeks. So, anyways, I was telling Tom, it's like I didn't understand how to do any of this business stuff. And so he gives me, I mean, we'd met a few times and talked a few times, and he gave me a copy of his book. This is his actual book. This is the same copy he gave me, Create Crucial Insight. This book has changed the trajectory of my life. What is this thing, space between ideas? I've been talking for 18 minutes. What is the space between ideas? So I started reading Tom's book, and I grew up in a culture where books speak to you, where the characters in books speak to you, and that you model your life after the principles and the stories and the ideas that are coming off of the pages of powerful books. And what happens to a person like this is you start to recognize the books that matter, and you start to recognize when something is happening to you. And as I started to read this book, I started noticing something was happening to me. I could feel the way that I was thinking. I could feel my attitude shifting. I started to build some kind of thinking mechanism. I started to build something around me. An operating system. Now, don't get me wrong, this book is extremely difficult to read. Extremely difficult to read. And, well, from Silicon Valley, I went to Hollywood. I thought I could become an actor. They told me an overnight sensation, an overnight success takes 10 years. An overnight success takes 10 years. So anyways, I had some visa issues because I'm from Canada. And you have all these illegals crossing your American border, but Canadians, we go down there, and it's just like it's very challenging to deal with this issue. So, anyways, so I was back in Canada eventually, and I took the LSATs. I tried to get into law school. I didn't get into law school, and then one day I was having dinner with my parents. And my dad looked at me and said, "So what's the plan?" Can you imagine? You're in China for 10 years and then you come back with what? A degree in China law? Okay, what are you gonna do with that? It's like you got to go back to China. Your degree is in China law, but I can't be in China. I can't do China law in China because I don't have a law degree from Canada. And then I apply for law school in Canada and I don't get in. So I had nothing. But that's where I came back to this piece of paper. Like literally, this piece of paper that's you could read it actually. It says, where is it? It's over here. All right, Russian, Chinese, Arabic, and French. It's like there it is. So it's what's next? Russia. So I went to Russia to learn Russian, and I had two really big issues in Russia. First of all, Russian is an insane language. It is nothing like Chinese. Like, I don't know if you've seen any of these, like, sometimes you'll see an Instagram post and then it'll be like, I, me. So in English, you can say I as a subject pronoun. You can say me as an object pronoun. And then and then in Russian, it's like there's like a million ways to say it. And Chinese is one character. And like word after word, you'll see these posts. If you ever see Chinese compared to English compared to Russian, I'm sure you could Google it. It's just ridiculous. So like you have to memorize 26 words for one character in Chinese. And I thought, everyone's like, yeah, Chinese is hard because there's characters. I love Chinese characters. I really enjoyed sitting and just writing Chinese characters. That was like, I would just sit there for hours and hours and hours a day. That's how I learned Chinese, was just sitting and writing characters. I loved it. I mean, obviously you can see that my YouTube studio here is a work in progress. And you could probably also notice that I'm probably a little bit artistic and creative, and you're going to see over the next while that things will probably change and improve. And so writing Chinese characters was something that I really enjoyed doing. But writing Russian words with just like a slight variation at the ending, because you're just basically changing the ending, and you have to memorize like 26 or 30 or a million different endings, and they're just like, and based on the situation and based on the verb and based on the case and based on this and that and the gender of the word, and like these endings are constantly changing, and it was just so insanely difficult. The other issue was that I had spent 10 years of my life, blood, sweat, and tears every day, just more than I wanted to breathe, learning Chinese. And what did I get from the experience? Heartache, failure. Like, it was really tough leaving everything that I'd experienced in China, and the couple of burnouts, and spending like that, such an investment, because I didn't really know what it meant to invest in a career, or to invest in education, or to invest in relationships, or to invest. I didn't understand that you put all of that energy in, and you should be having some kind of expectation of getting something out. I didn't think that far ahead. When I was younger, I was just like, hey, I like doing this. Oh, I like doing that. It was like so innocent. It was so naive. I had these huge expectations, but then nothing, like worse than nothing, like getting beat up with a bat until you're just, there's this character in Chinese. There was this one emperor, and they thought he was like God, and they thought, well, they wanted to test if he was God or not. So they said, if he's God, then he should know. If we kill his son and then grind his son into paste and then feed him his own son, he should know. Then we'll know if he's God or not. It's like, what kind of weird story is this? This is like in law school. They're teaching us this character. It's like, why? I didn't really need to know that character. Human paste character? That is a wild character. Human paste character. I guess that kind of pulled me off my train of thought. Human paste character. So I was like, just like totally beaten up. I was just this naive kid. I go to China. I think I could learn Chinese and just completely beat up, just into human paste. And I thought, well, you put all that effort into it. You should get more out of it than just becoming human paste. That's not the way an investment is supposed to work. So in Russia, I don't know. I was like, it's like 10 times more difficult than Chinese. And what am I going to get out of this? And it's so cold and it's dark and the winters are terrible. But it gave me an opportunity. So I started teaching business English. Why did I start teaching business English? Because Create Crucial Insight, it's based on this idea of like, I was in Canada, I was in Calgary, and I started going to these events where you could give a presentation. And a lot of people, they were making presentations with some kind of multi-level marketing gimmick, product, service, whatever. And other people were doing life insurance, like basically people who were trying to sell stuff. And it's really interesting because the whole idea of sales, it has some connection with the idea of coaching or even teaching. Now, let's say that teaching is the lowest level, and then maybe sales is the middle level, and then coaching is the top level. Now, why do I say that? It's because teaching, there's always a huge market for teaching because there's a huge amount of people who want to learn, and then they have various budgets. And to be able to teach something, you just have to be smarter than the person who's learning, or at least you have to have more experience. And so it's simple. You just find somebody who knows it, and then you go and learn from that person. Now, sales, it's like in addition to like, so let's talk about the idea of like when you sell something, it's a service that's wrapped up in a product, or it's a service wrapped up in a service. But usually a salesperson is giving you a specific beginning, middle, and end. It's a product. It's going to solve this specific problem. Teaching is usually like a process because you never quite know exactly what it's going to take for that other person to learn the thing which they need to learn. So it's a little bit more like hard to judge exactly how much you need when you're trying to learn something. But products are usually like, you have a blender and it's like, it's a whole machine. It's an appliance and you know exactly what it does, what you're going to get out of it, how to use it, how to clean it, how much electricity it needs. It does this work for you. And it's like a specific job. And so a salesperson, as long as they can point out the problem that you have and how this is a solution to your problem, then a salesperson can generally make money. Now, why is that more difficult than teaching? Well, I just think that the teaching, I don't know, because I think there's more things to learn than there are products to buy. Like if you look around yourself in the house, it's like, okay, so I got a stove, I got a table, I got a chair. You have all these functional things. They all function as something. But in your brain, there's like way more functions that you're actually using on a daily basis. And so all of those things, all of those functions in your brains are things that you've learned. So that's why there's such a huge demand for learning. And then products, they last, you just buy it and then it provides that function and you don't have to really maintain it too much, just enough to keep it going. Now, coaching, it's teaching, but when we talk about coaching, it's like, usually it's a little bit more complicated methodology, and we use this idea of coaching for more difficult tasks. I don't know, maybe who knows? These are just, you can probably just go back and, I'm sorry for the last 3 minutes of your life that you just wasted. So I'm in Calgary and I go to these events where we're supposed to do some public speaking. And I tried to share these ideas from Tom's book. And what happened was I just realized that like I have no idea what I'm talking about. And the other people that were listening were like, you have no idea what you're talking about. Wow. It was insane. It was totally insane. Nobody, yeah. And so I had this idea, okay, I want to learn Russian and also I want to be able to teach, like, I want to understand this book, Create Crucial Insight. And so, okay, I'll teach business English. Also, I wanted to be more comfortable with speaking to managers because at this time I was like, I've always been quite sensitive to emotion. And then suddenly, like, after my experience in China, I became super sensitive to emotion. And like I was uncomfortable speaking to managers. I was still young and inexperienced, and so I just wanted this experience where I could talk to managers. I wanted to be able to work through some of the issues in this book, Create Crucial Insight, and I wanted to see if I could develop some kind of coaching course, maybe some software. I wanted to develop some kind of concept. I mean, this was my startup. That was the whole point of going to Silicon Valley, was to do a startup, and then here's the book. Okay, make a startup. So I left China. No, I left Russia. In fact, I left Russia because I had met a young lady, and at this time, I no longer had a Chinese wife. I met a young lady in Moscow, and she said, if you would like a Russian wife, you need to have a real career and you need to have property. So I was like, oh no, is that what I need? Like, I don't know. Like, is it possible that a human is that naive? And it's just like, where do normal people learn these types of lessons? Like, why is it that I have to travel halfway across the world just to figure out like normal everyday ideas that everybody already knows? I don't know. Anyway, so I moved to Saudi Arabia, and there you go. So actually, the wild thing is that we got Arabic on the list. So I started studying Arabic, and yeah, that didn't go very. I mean, it was okay. The Arabic grammar is very similar to Russian grammar. There's like, because I didn't realize that most languages have these like male and female, sometimes neutral or plural nouns. Like, why do all these nouns have genders? Why is a table a male or a female? That just makes no sense. And then you also have conjugation. So in English, we have very few conjugations. We basically have two types of conjugation, like I run, he runs. We just put a z at the end. But like in other languages, like every single I, he, she, it, they, we, it's like they're all conjugated differently. So the verb changes in all these different situations, and so you have to memorize all these different things. And then the nouns are males and females, and then suddenly, if then the verb sometimes also affects the way that those nouns and are are written. The end, you'll change the endings, and then Arabic has this wild thing, like, what's your name? If you ask a man, what's your name? You have to use like the male form of name, and then if you're asking a woman, then you have to use the female form of name. And it's like, whoa. And then you're writing you're writing backwards. You're writing from right to left. And honestly, I enjoy talking to young ladies, and well, women, and and but in Arabic, yeah, it's true. I could use on. I wasn't in Riyadh. I was in this little town south of Riyadh called Al Kharaj, and you're not gonna be able to speak to a woman, like zero chance, zero. Like, okay, so there's this one time I was in the grocery store, and the checkout, like the cashier, was a lady, and I didn't even notice. But so I give her they always wear gloves, and I give her the money, and she gives me the receipt, and her finger just like brushed up against my finger, and that was the only time in an entire year that I had. Well, she was wearing gloves, so we didn't actually physically touch. But you know what I'm saying? So this is. It just didn't seem like it was the best language to study. Um, And I felt like, I don't know, it just also it was like 48 degrees Celsius outside, and and it's like a completely different culture. And I was still single. And so I was like, I don't know if this is going to help me to improve my dating life or not. Probably not. But I had this plan. So I was going to stay in Saudi Arabia for 3 years, and then I'd have enough money to go back to Russia, and then I could buy an apartment. That was the plan. But after 1 year, then COVID hit. So after COVID, no, during COVID, I had to leave Saudi Arabia because of my visa status. The visas are always a tricky thing, or at least they've always been a tricky thing for me. And so I flew to France, and then from France I flew to Belarus. I was in Belarus for 8 months. I started looking for property. It was too expensive because I only had 1 year of savings rather than 3 years of savings. Also, it was cold and dark, just like Moscow. And then I went to Ukraine, and I know this is a hot topic right now, but honestly, I just like I felt I even sent a message because I had students in Moscow, and I just said, hey, I feel that this place is not an independent country. This is Russia. And he's like, oh, really? That's weird. And I said, yeah, I feel like this is Russia. And also, I don't feel comfortable being here. And I left. So I went to Bulgaria. But by the time you get to Bulgaria, then they don't speak Russian anymore. And my dream was kind of to live in an area where I could afford an apartment, where I didn't have a visa issue, where I could date Russian speaking ladies. And I guess I didn't quite get it because now, it's, I got to the end of the road. I got to the end of the story. In fact, I feel like, so this place where I am now, it's kind of like when I was in Bulgaria, I kind of gave up because I'd been through all the countries that speak Russian. I mean, unless you want to move over to like Kazakhstan or Turkmenistan or something like that. And in fact, and my mom, she was like, hey, I always had a dream to be in Spain during the winter. And I went to Spain in the winter 2 years ago and sent her pictures of flowers. And I'd kind of given up on my dream. I think that was the end. And then because I could only stay in the EU for like 3 months. So when we got to the end of the 3 months in Spain, I bought a ticket to Nairobi. I figured I was going to go to Kenya and start heading through Africa. Like for me, traveling is like so simple. Like I can basically go anywhere. And when I was in Belarus, that's when I started working online. And so now I became a digital nomad. But then, true to form, on December 31st of whatever year that was, what is it now, 2024? So 2023, 2022, 2022. So it was December 31st of 2021. Kenya changes their laws. And so it's like everyone's like saying there's all these lockdowns, but I traveled to like 5 or 6 different countries, like during COVID, and you just have to get a PCR test, and then that's it. It was like it wasn't that hard to move around. There was just limited numbers of countries that allowed you to move around, and there were like time windows. Sometimes it was open, sometimes it was closed. So so then Nairobi, they canceled it. So I had to cancel my visa. I had to cancel my Airbnb. I had to cancel my flight. I got all of that canceled for free. And then I didn't know where to go. It was either Egypt or Turkey again. Like I just didn't. And then suddenly I saw for the first time Georgia. And I had no idea what this country was. And then I just looked at and then I looked at the visa. It said you could stay here without a visa for 365 days. And then to renew the visa, you leave the country for 1 day and then come back. So that means you can stay here forever, as long as you leave for one day and come back. So, and I found out that a lot of people here speak Russian. So I was like, okay, that's it. That's the answer. And also, it's not so cold because, it's further south. So, wow, okay. I mean, it was that or Armenia, but then Armenia, you could only stay there for 3 months. And then here, you could stay for a whole year and then leave. So I flew to Tbilisi, and then in Tbilisi, I started having panic attacks, and I didn't know why. And so then I started going from village to village to village, just traveling. And then suddenly, I had this crazy idea of having like a bicycle caravan, like having like a tent on wheels and then a bicycle and just riding around and then sleeping inside of this tent and then getting an electric generator and then teaching my English lessons. Well, I had the bicycle caravan, but it's this. So eventually I found this town. I bought this apartment. And then a year later, I went to Africa. I went to Kenya, and I bought a bicycle in Kenya, and I rode that bicycle through Kenya and Uganda and Rwanda. And then I bought a plane ticket. I was just going to trash the bike, but then the plane ticket said I could take 2 pieces of luggage, and the other piece of luggage was the same weight as my bicycle. So I wrapped it up and took it with me to South Africa. So I started the trip in Egypt, actually. And I was in Alexandria, Egypt, and I went on a trip from Alexandria, Egypt, all the way down to the south tip of South Africa. And then I flew back here, and I brought the bike with me. So now I have my bicycle caravan. I have my bicycle. I have my apartment, and I'm here. This is the end of the trip. I'm at the end of the road. I'm done. I did it. I went everywhere I wanted to go. I have an apartment. I own it. I have a bicycle. I have a bicycle. I have a bicycle. And now, and I have 3,000 hours, more than 3,000 hours of teaching. And most of those hours are talking about concepts related to business coaching. So from Calgary, when these guys were looking at me and saying, who the heck are you? And you have a Chinese law degree. And why do you think you can teach us about coaching or business or anything? And I couldn't. But then 5 years later, 2 years in Russia and 1 year in Belarus and then 1 year in Saudi Arabia and then 1 year, well, now it's been 2 years here. I don't even know how long I've been here. 2, almost 3. I don't know how many. I guess 2 years. Yeah, 2 years. So what's next? What is going on now? What's the purpose of this channel now? Who am I now? What are we doing? What's the objective? So that's the whole purpose of the sharing the screen at the beginning of the 43 minutes. Are you kidding me? All right. So that was the point here. Because I want to show you how I think. I want to show you how I solve problems. And I want to do something. So, what is it? How do we start this process? So, you have to set up a target. You have to define what is it that you want to achieve, I guess. And then what? And then you have to break it down into milestones. And then what? And then you have to define the objectives. And then you have to describe the activities. And then you have to achieve those results. Achieve small results that build into bigger, more powerful results. And how do we do that? Like, how do we even start? And that's what this is about. So that's why I'm here. That's why I've come back to this YouTube channel. You can see that I've got some subscribers. I've made almost 200 videos in the past, and then I just took them offline. Mostly it was when I was trying to figure out what that Create Crucial Insight book was all about. But now I've actually taught 300 people. And now it's time to push forward and to create a business, because like I'm stuck here. I made it all the way here just to find out that I'm stuck. All right. So like, where is it that you want to go next? I want to go back to Canada. All right. So what's standing in the way of you in Canada? Well, I need to run a successful business that enables me the time and freedom to manage my own schedule, to have my own opinions. Right? Like, to manage my own schedule and have my own opinions. It just seems kind of weird, right? Like, how is this even possible? That my objectives, like the thing that I really want is to have a business so that I can manage my own schedule and have my own opinions. But that's the truth these days. All right, so what are we going to do here? What we're going to do is I'm going to be using this YouTube space for the next little while to think through these issues. Now, target. I usually call it a to-do list, and we'll call it YouTube. And this is what I do with students. It's like I try to set up ideas and then build on those ideas. And so what do we have here? So we have the space between ideas. And then I have this other thing, this other project. And I want to use this platform to speak to coaches, business coaches, and students of business coaching. And over here, I want to build a community of people interested in learning French. All right, so we go back to this list, right? Like we go back to the old man: Russian, Chinese, Arabic, and French. So we're getting to the end of the journey. And we end the journey at the beginning, where I asked this man, I said, what are the languages I need to learn to become a successful businessman? And then he said, okay, you need to learn Russian, Chinese, Arabic, and French. And now it's it. So now it's time for me to become a successful businessman. And I finished learning Russian, Chinese, and Arabic. And now to become a successful businessman, I have to learn French. It's like, what? Are you serious? This is your life. This is like 20 years. This is how you've defined your life. This is how you've pursued your life. This is your meaning. This is what drives you. This is what you want. This is who you become. Like, how is it possible that a 19-year-old kid has a strange meeting with an old man And 20 years later, he finds himself next to these mountains in Georgia, creating a YouTube channel and explaining how he's going to create two businesses to become a successful businessman. But that's what it is. Welcome to the space between ideas.